Cruz?
Thank you. Can you see my screen?
We can,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. Thank you. Well, thank you for the introduction, Russ. And first of all, before starting with my session, I just wanted to say a big thank you to all the attendees for being here today on a summer Sunday. And also thanks to the organizers for this opportunity. So as I said, I'm going to talk about business events today and how FNO can communicate with external systems using this feature, business events. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Cruz Margaix, and I'm a technical architect. Currently, I'm working at SA Global, which is a Microsoft partner in ISV. But I have been in the Dynamics AX world for over 20 years now. I have mostly a technical background. I started as a developer and then took more senior roles as technical lead or technical architect. And I've always enjoyed the challenges of AX, FNO. So I've been very interested in working with performance issues and also version upgrade projects. Since I started working with D365, that was like 4 years ago, I have been also very involved with integration projects, and hence my interest with business events the moment they came out. Lately, I have also been working on the dual write framework and extending the integration capabilities of FNO into the Power Platform. So let's go and see what I'm going to talk you through about today. We'll start with an introduction and definition of what are the business events, and then we'll go through a couple of demos. So my purpose is that instead of showing you a lot of slides, I'll try to make it quite practical. So there will be a demo on how to use business events with alerts, and also how to extend the workflow capabilities in FNO with business events. Then we'll go through the security aspects of business events, and as a wrap up, we'll see what we can expect next and what are the most interesting resources about business events. Of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat window, and then at the end of the session, we'll go through it. And just a quick message before we start. This is not going to be a very technical session, so we are not going to go into details on X++ development or anything like that. It's going to go a session where we'll see how we can use this event, so all the skills are welcome here. So let's start with this definition of business events. What are business events? Well, as I mentioned in my introduction, I have been very involved in integration projects. And from the beginning, one of the issues we found, one of the challenges was that from FNO, we were not able to let external systems know that something had happened into FNO. So I'll give you an example. One of the first integration scenarios I faced was a customer that had a third-party file management system, and what they wanted to do is to create a folder in this file management system when a new customer was created in FNO. So they kept a folder per customer, so they wanted to trigger this folder creation as soon as a new customer was created in FNO. So at the time, we didn't have any triggers from FNO, anything at all that was able to send this message to this third-party app saying, hey, a new customer has been created. So the only solution we had was, well, in this case, we were using OData entities, as Peter has shown in the session before. So we extended the OData entity with the created datetime. So this third-party file management system was or had to implement this pooling, and based on a schedule, was constantly asking F&O, has there any new customer have been created, and constantly requesting this information into F&O. So now with business events, what comes to my mind when I think about business event is this image. So we have now F&O. Imagine this big antenna is F&O sending this information out of it when something happened. Now, what are business events? So business events are, we could interpret it as a message that F&O sends externally when an action happens in F&O. So something, this could be a third-party app, or this could be as well a Power Platform app, can pick this message up and complete this business action. So we can build business processes across different applications. Let's go now to F&O and see how we can set up and how we can start using these business events. So the business events are available from the sysadmin menu. So if we go to system administration, under setup, we'll find this submenu, business events. I'll start by talking very quickly through the event parameters. So in this environment, my environment is in 10.09. I think the business event parameters were made available around 10.07 or 10.08. So Microsoft has surfaced here these parameters to allow us to fine-tune the business event performance. But if we think about how business events work, so when something, as I said before, when something happens in F&O, say we post an invoice, we post a journal, or we submit a workflow for approval. So when these actions happen in F&O, then this trigger is sent externally, and this happens in near real time. And in order for this to be near real time and not dependent on any batch job or any schedule, then Microsoft has allocated a number of batch threads that will run this business events process. So by default, we've got these parameters, but if we find in our scenario we have some performance issues, some limitations, then we have the ability here to modify them. Ideally, we will never do, but if we need it, then this is the place to go. Also, there's another parameter which is not visible here on the UI, but does exist in the business parameters table. And this parameter is the number of threads allocated to business events. Again, we in most scenarios, we will not need to modify that value, but if we have some issues and we need to adjust that value, we can do so. So we can do it directly by SQL management in our development or UAT environments. And once this is tested and confirmed it works, if we need to move that parameter into our production environment, obviously we had to request this to Microsoft for them to do it. And finally, I mentioned this is not working through batch jobs, but it did at the beginning of business events. Now we have this parameter here. Again, in most scenarios, this is going to be no, but if we are working with business events, we find some issues with them, we are unable to trace what's happening, then we can set this flag on and then set up a batch job to run the business events, and this will give us more control on what's happening behind the scenes. Okay, so this is about the parameters, and then the place to go always for business events is the business events catalog. On this screen here, we've got all the events that are available out of the box. So as you can see here, we have a huge list of events. And these events, as we go through them, as I mentioned, represent different actions. So for example, this event here on the right side of the screen, we can see that this event is triggered when a free text invoice is posted, or we also have this event when write-off is posted. So we have different out-of-the-box events. We can as well develop our custom business events if we have a need to do it. I'm not going to go into that detail because this is not development-oriented session, but if you need to create your custom events for your solution, then please go to docsmicrosoft.com. I'll give you a link at the end of the session, but the description of first the recommended scenarios to develop a custom business events is very good. And then the details on what you need to do to create your custom business events is very good as well. So there's a development framework that will allow you to create your business events, but by just writing 2 or 3 classes. Okay, so we can see here we've got like different categories. I'm going to show you a slide to summarize the different types of categories and events we have. So we can categorize the different events into 3 big groups. Application, these events will respond to an action in the application, and we have events in different modules. So this is where the free text invoice posted event will fall, or the write-off posting will fall as well. We have application events on the account receivable, asset management, purchase orders, sales orders, and accounts payable. Then we have alerts, events. So these events will be sent when an alert is raised within F&O. We'll see a demo on this. And we have 2 types, one for each type of alert. And then we have workflow events as well. We'll also see a demo on workflow events, so I'll go into detail of the different types there. If you intend to start working with business events, I highly recommend starting with an application business event. That's more straightforward. So you can try to build or consume your business events, for example, when a free text invoice is posted. Okay, let's go back to the environment. Okay, so we've got all the events here. By default, all these events are not active. We need to activate them to start using them. Okay, and we also need an endpoint. So in order to use in order to consume business events, we need these business events to be exposed on an endpoint. So there are two key elements in the business events framework: the business event itself and the endpoint. So before starting using this, we need to create our endpoint as well. We can create an endpoint here by clicking new, and then we can see all the list of endpoint types we can use. So we have a number of Azure-based endpoints. This will be used on Azure integrations. There's a lot of detail on how to create these endpoints on docmicrosoft.com and when it is recommended to use each of them. I'd rather go to today and see how we can use the events instead of going into this detail. Then we have the Power Automate as well. HTTPS will use this one for non-Azure related integrations, and then the blob storage, that's where we would like to store information rather than reacting to it. I'm not going to create one here, but the standard process would be I have my business event, I create an endpoint, and then if I want to activate this one, click on activate, select which endpoint I want to use, and click OK. That will activate my endpoint. We can establish an end-to-end relationship. That means that multiple business events can be exposed in the same endpoint and the other way around. So multiple endpoints can expose the same business event. We can also select a legal entity. So if we want to use to match a business event with an endpoint specifically for a single legal entity, we could select it from here. If we leave it blank, then it'll work for all the legal entities in our system. So once we activate the business event, it will appear here on the list of active business events. So you can see here I've got this alerts event on this endpoint, and then at any point we can deactivate them, and then this will be presented here where we can reactivate them again. And we also have this tab where any error messages during the business events processing will be presented, so we can troubleshoot any issues. If you are going to use Power Automate, and if you're going to start using business events, I'd highly recommend using Power Automate as well. Then you don't need to create your endpoint, because the synchronization between Power Automate and FNO with regards to the consumption of business events is seamless. So you just need to select this business event from Power Automate. We'll see now how to do that. And then it will automatically create your endpoint here and activate your business event and link your business event to your endpoint. So I haven't created manually these endpoints. Power Automate did it for me. Okay, so let's go on and start. Now that we know what we're talking about, let's start with this the the use of alerts and business events together is very interesting, and I think that's something that most F&O developers and especially integrators were looking forward. Alerts have been within AX for a while now, and they're a very good tool, but sometimes it feels like they're not enough, so that we could do more things with them. So by using alerts within F&O only, we can send notifications to the Action Center. We can also send an email, but only to a single email address, but we would like to do more. And that's where Microsoft has extended the functionality already available with alerts with business events. So we have a range of possibilities out of F&O. So if you remember this scenario I mentioned before with the external file management system, what I'm going to do today is to kind of replicate that process. So what I'm going to do in my scenario is when a customer is created in F&O, then what I want to happen is that an email is sent to an email address, and also I'm going to create a folder in a SharePoint site. Okay, so I'm going to try and replicate that scenario that we were not able to implement a few years ago. So let's go and see how we implement that. So back in F&O, the first thing we'll need to do is to set up the alert. So I already have that alert. So if I go to all customers and manage my alerts, I have my alert here. So this alert is going to be raised every time record is created in the customers table. In order for this alert to be sent as a business event, we need to check this flag. So say send externally, yes. So this is the important bit when we want to use business events in conjunction with alerts. There's one limitation though, and is the fact that this send externally flag doesn't work together with this organization-wide flag. So if I set this one to yes, you've noticed this one's changed to no and also been disabled, grayed out. So at the moment, we cannot use organization-wide alerts together with business events. So if I want this to happen across my organization, then I need to set up this alert in every legal entity. Okay, so I'll set this one back and this one here. And I've got my alert. I also need, I already have as well my batch job to process alerts. And then the next thing we'll need to do is to create a flow in Power Automate to pick up this alert when it's sent externally and do something with it. So we'll go to Power Automate, and then we will create a new flow. I'm just going to show you how we start using the business events. So when we create a new flow, we can select this one. I'm going to skip this step, and what we want to have is the business event trigger. So if we find the F&O connector here, then we can see we have this when a business event occurs trigger. So we select it, and then we need to select an F&O instance using this one. And then we select which category. You can see here all the different categories we have in F&O. I'll use alerts, and then which event we are going to process here. I'll use this one. And we can select a specific legal entity or leave it blank. Okay, so when we complete this flow here and save the flow, this is when automatically the endpoint will be created in F&O and the business event activated. I'm not going to do this manually today. Instead, I'll show you. I'll leave this page and I'll show you the flow that I have already created. So if I edit this flow here, I've got my trigger, and then the next thing I'm going to do is to use this parse JSON action, and this is something we have to do always after the trigger. And why is that? Well, this trigger will provide us with a container, this body, which contains information about the business event. This information is available here. So if we go back to the business events catalog, the event I'm using is this one. As you can see here, we've got the list fields passed to the event. So all this information is carried by this event when it's sent externally. These fields are giving me information, for example, on the customer that's being created in this scenario, but all the events have this list of fields as well. So for example, on a free text invoice, I have information like the invoice ID, invoice date, invoice amount. So we can do whatever we need with this data. The list of fields that we have available here, this is the out-of-the-box list of fields, but we can as well extend it. We also have a framework to do that. However, we have to be careful with this because events are meant to be lightweight. They're not meant to carry loads of information. They're not a means of performing a data migration. If we want to extract data and extract a lot of information about our system, we should be using the data migration tools or the data management API, but not the business events. We want the business events to be very fast and to run in real time and just carry the minimum information we'll need to process them. Okay, so I'll go back here to my event, and here I have all this list of fields. So on my flow here, this step will just give me this body, this kind of big container with all the information within it. But that's quite difficult to read. What we actually want is to be able to access individually each and every one of these fields. So what we'll do is to use this parse JSON action. We provide the outcome of this step, and then we provide a schema for this action to be able to read this body. And where do we get this schema from? Well, we get it from the business event catalog. So we can download this schema from here. This will give us a text file, and then we just come here, click on generate from sample, provide that text file, and then from this step onwards, then I'll be able to access all these fields individually. For example, in this validation, so here you can say I'm able to access the table name and the type of trigger, which are fields contained in the event payload. On this validation, what I'm doing, and this is as well important for all the alert scenarios, is to check that this alert has actually been sent by creating a new customer, because we can create a range of different alerts in our F&O system, and then we can have different flows to process different alerts. But I want this process to happen only when a customer is created. And this is why I have this validation. So if this is true, well, if it's no, this flow will just terminate and nothing. If it's true, what I'm going to do is to get more data from the customer. From the event payload, I can get the data area ID, and I can get the customer ID as well as the key value one. But I would like to get more information about the customer. So by using this action on the F&O connector, then what I'm actually doing is to query the OData endpoint for customers. This is actually running an OData query. So what I'm going to do is to retrieve the customer data for the customer that I have created. And then I'll send an email. In this case, I've hard-coded an email address, but we could, for example, from this customer data, get the employee responsible and send an email to him or her. And then I can also create a SharePoint folder. I'm going to try and run this. I will create a new customer. Okay, I'm going to leave it running because you'll have to go through the batch job for alerts as well. And while it runs, I'll wrap up on alert events. So when would we use these alert events? Well, typically when we are looking at more complex notification scenarios. So we can send emails to different people, more perhaps emails like more nicely written and with more information into them. We can also send notifications to mobile phones, to Teams. We could use adaptive cards with Teams, so we can have a full range of possibilities. Also, we want to trigger integrations across systems. So for example, this integration I mentioned before, there's one restriction that it only works for company bound alerts. So for example, it doesn't work for as I showed you, organization-wide alerts, or even tables that are cross-company. At the moment, there seems to be some issue with having the send externally and send email option together. So if you find some issues with this, try and turn off the send email option. I'm going to go back to F&O, see if this has been created. So if I go to my flow, yeah, here it is. So this is my flow running. So as you can see here, the output of this parse JSON is the detail on all the information carried over by this event. And then when I get my customer data, then here I've got all the information on the customer account that we can use later in the process. I have received this very basic email here, but it'll give you an idea of what we can do with it. So let's move on to the next demo, which is the use of workflow events. And I think there are a lot of expectations about the workflow events as well. Workflows, or the workflow framework in FNO, is a very good framework. We can do lots of things with it, but we always would like to do more. And here's where we can use the events as well to extend workflows. Does it mean we are ready now to stop using workflows in FNO and just implement our approvals out of it? I don't think so. So at the moment, we still need workflows in FNO because when we want a record or an action to be approved, so for example, when we want the posting of an invoice to be approved, we want to block this invoice, lock it so nobody can post it until the approval has been completed. And at the moment, we cannot do that externally yet. So we need this workflow framework to be in place. But what we can do is we can create a very, very, very simple workflow in FNO and then implement all the complexity, all the functionality of it out of FNO. In this scenario, I'm going to extend the free text invoice approval process. What I want to do is very simple as well. In this scenario, what I want to do is to send an email for a free text invoice to be approved by the responsible employee of the customer. This responsible employee is not a participant I could use with the standard from workflow framework. So I'm going to use Power Automate to do so. So what I've done is I have created this very basic workflow with just a single stage, and this approval is sent to a single user. That's an admin user that's not going to perform any action on it. And then externally, I will build in Power Automate by my flow. So if we have a scenario where we want to send the approval request to different people depending on, for example, the invoice amount, then we can build a simple workflow on FNO and then build all these conditions externally within Power Automate. When we went through the catalog, we saw a large list of workflow events. And that's because for each workflow that we have, FNO will create a set of events. So as you can see here, my FNO workflow has this ID 249. So I have all this set here of events with this number here. So these events are specific for my workflow. So any other workflow will have another set of specific events. And here we have different types. If we go to the catalog, again, I can filter here, as I showed you before. So we have all these long list of events for workflows. If I find mine, then we have this workflow type. So this one is triggered when the workflow itself is submitted. So it's like the more general one. And then we have 3 here for the approval element. This one element started will be triggered when that stage approval starts. And this one here will be triggered for any other actions on that element. And the most interesting one is this one, the workflow work item. This is, if we have an element, it could create multiple work items if we have multiple approvers. So each of these items will send an individual event. And as you can see here, we have another set of 3. This is because on the free text invoice workflow, we have 2 types of tasks, the approval and a review task. So this set here will correspond to the review. Power Automate provides us with a template already. So if we are to create, we can go to the templates, and if we want to create a flow for a workflow, and we search here on finance, then we can see we have this template we can use. So I highly recommend using it if you want to build your first workflow approval on Power Automate. In fact, I have used it, and I used it to create my workflow. I'm going to go through it. So again, here we've got the trigger, that parse JSON, and here we need a bit more processing on the data. And that's because if we go to the event payload here, we find this field here, which is very interesting, very useful. This is called serialized workflow document data. This field contains all the data on the record that has triggered the workflow. In this scenario, all the data on the free text invoice. However, it comes like a big string. Again, very difficult to process, and obviously we'd like to get into the details, access the values in that free text invoice. So what we do here is to convert that serialized document data big string again into JSON format here. So we can, from this point onwards, access individually all the values here, like the customer account, the due date, the document date, the language, all this information that's within the free text invoice. There's a very good post in Yammer about this and how to do this. So if you're interested in it, please go and check on Yammer. So once we have read all this information, we have to validate the work item, make sure this work item is still available in FNO. So the user has not canceled the workflow, for example. In order to do that, we call an OData action. This is available on the template. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the customer record using an OData query on customers v3 again. I'm using here this invoice account that I have been able to extract from that serialized document data big string. And then from the customer, what I'll do is, well, what I want to do is to send an email to the responsible employee. On the customer, I've got the responsible worker reg ID. So with that information, I'll go to the worker table using OData again, and I will query the worker table with the employee responsible on the customer, and then I'll get the email, and that's the email I'm going to use to send the approval email. So if there's a condition here, if the work item is still valid, then I'll send this approval email. All this information comes from previous steps, and for each response, because I could send this approval to multiple approvers as well, as we can do within F&O. And then for each approval, then what I can do is complete the item. Again, this is an OData action that will allow me to approve or reject the item into F&O. Okay, so again, I'm going to go to my free text invoices. I already have a free text invoice here ready, this one, which is in draft status. I'm going to send it to Workflow. And again, here we have batch processes involved. So in the meantime, I'm going to go through to some of my slides. So again, as a wrap up, we would use workflow events when we want to implement complex scenarios, or when participants are not available in F&O, like my scenario, where the responsible employee is not a participant. Also, we've seen a lot of interest in being able to approve an F&O workflow from an email, because this capability is not available in the standard F&O now. And this is something customers are very keen to start using, and we can do that using Power Automate. And well, there's something you have to consider if you have your custom workflows. Obviously, you have a custom workflow developed in your F&O system. It will also have its workflows events assigned. You don't need to do anything special for that. The only thing you should be aware of is that your workflow action manager has to implement this class, because otherwise you won't be able to validate or complete your workflow items externally. While this process goes, I'll run through the security as well. The security on business events is interesting because we have two levels of security. It's based on the standard F&O security concept. So obviously we have role-based security, and it's been implemented by a number of privileges. So we've got here the privileges that we will use. We have this business events catalog view or maintain, and we also have this, which is really important, subscribe to business events from service. So if we have a power user and we want this user to be able to create his or her flows from Power Automate, for example, we need to assign this privilege to that user, and then we have like more administrator privileges. So you could create a custom role with a couple of privileges and then assign the role to a user. And there's also a record level security feature this feature has to be activated via feature management, so it's not enabled by default, but well, you'll have it to activate it. And once this feature is activated, then this security option will pop up in your business events catalog, and you have to make sure you enable it. So again, even if you activate the feature, you'll have to enable the security as well. And once that's enabled, you'll see this security tab, and here you can manually create this list of business events that are accessible by each role. So we can say in this scenario, well, the collections manager role can access the event when a payment journal is posted. The sales manager role can access the event when a free text invoice is posted. When we do that, so if I have a user with those two roles on the event catalog, this user will only see this, not the full list. And when this user creates a flow on the business event trigger, this user will only see these two events available on the drop-down list. Okay, let's go back and see if this flow has run. Okay, so still running, and that's running because it's if we go to it, it's gone through all the process, and then it's waiting here for the approval to be completed. So if I go to my email, I've got here this email from Flow. So see, well, this is very simple, but you can build this email as nice as you would like. And this is something that a lot of workflow approvers are looking forward, this ability to approve anytime, anywhere from their email account. So from here, I could approve, reject, or request a change. With this link, I will access to this free text invoice as well. But if I approve, I can comment on the approval. And then the workflow has completed here, and my free text invoice, well, it needs to go again through the process of through the batch processing, but yeah, it will soon be approved. I'll go back to it later. Okay, so just very quickly, what's next? Well, there's not much information out there about what we can expect next. Business events are mentioned in the release plans for the release 2020 wave 1, but not with no specific details. But we've seen over the last months continuous improvements. The surfacing of the business events parameters to the UI, also the implementation of new out-of-the-box events, improved schemas, so we can expect improvements as well. There's a very interesting demo group I recommend you to join, where you can engage with other people using business events. And this is the link to the business events homepage in the docsmicrosoft.com website, which is really, really good. So again, if you have a chance, take a look at it. And well, with that, that's what I wanted to talk to you today. Hope you enjoyed this session. Again, many thanks for being here today. Don't know if we have any questions, but if we don't have time to go through them today, I'll take a look later. But at any time, please feel free to contact me on my email or connect with me on LinkedIn, and we can continue our chat there.
Wow, thanks again, Cruz, for that elaborate session. Who would have thought you'd have ended up covering Power Automate and all these other features? So that was really, really good. Thanks again for doing that. In terms of questions, we've got a couple of minutes to hopefully see if we can answer any questions. There is a question related. Jovika is asking: is it possible to send directly approve reject workflow action items via email without using Power Automate? Okay, that's the first question.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I don't think the workflow framework at the moment allows approvals or rejections via email. So you'd have to implement that externally via Power Automate or any other approval tool.
Great. Okay, so also question is it possible to get rid of the validation step in flow and only start using the flow if a new customer is created that belongs to a specific customer group? A condition inside the flow might work, but makes the flow slow. Okay, this is obviously a very flow-centric question, so I don't know if we're able to answer that one, Cruz.
Could you repeat that one? Is it the validation on the alerts, or is it the validation on the workflow?
Yeah, a good question. Is it a valid? So it's for the question. So is the question, just to get a clarification on the question? It says to get rid of the validation step in the flow and only start running the flow if a new customer is created that belongs to the specific group. Yeah, so like I said, it is very much a flow-centric question. So
yeah, but
yeah.
Again, if you're going to link the execution on the flow to a specific customer group, you'll have to, if this is triggered from an alert, you'll have to read the information in the alert event and then query the customer, access the customer group, and then process from there.
Right. So there's a question asking what to do if I would like to activate a business event to a set of companies, not all, but more than one companies. So you want to activate only for specific companies. Is that possible?
You have to do it one by one. Yeah, but it's possible. Yeah.
So you can do one by one. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, what else is there? We're out of time. So maybe yep, I guess that's it. We've come to the end of the time. Obviously, please, Cruz, please share your contact details in the chat window.
Yeah, will do.
LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever method you prefer, so people can keep in touch with you and keep up to date with all the fantastic efforts you're doing for the community.
Thank you.
So that's the end of that session. Obviously, lots of goodies that have been covered today, aren't there? So really lots of new stuff for the community to learn. This is the new world of FinOps.